But this is where I left off. We want more pollutants for less cost. And essentially, that's what we're working on this Monoosnoc Brook project. I can't say we're there, but we're working towards it. And what we've been working on for the past 6 or 7 years is the renewal of Monoosnoc Brook, which, as I showed before, is a highly urbanized stream. Maybe not as much as in Worcester, but we're close. And these are some of the best management practices that we've been putting in that you can see here. But one of the things that we've been working on is, in terms of stormwater, the big issue in my mind is, where do you put these best management practices? Where are the best places? Where are you going to get the best results from putting these best management practices in? And how do you figure that out? Because just plunking down rain gardens, as good as they are, is not going to maximize their value. So we need to find a way to do that. And as Scott said before, one of the things that we know is that it's the streets. It's the streets that collect all of the pollutants from the yards and the parking lots and so forth, and they put them into those catch basins, and then they're gone. You don't see it anymore, right? But if you went down to the stream, you'd see it, because that's where it's going. And I think the main thing to think about in terms of the streets is, every time it rains, there's going to be a ton of pollutants being carried into the streets and then into Coes and Patches Pond and into Indian Lake and into Lake Samoset. So what we've been looking at, the new EPA stormwater permit, and I'm just going to say a couple of words about it because it's it's 60, 70 pages long, but in the permit, if it's still there, I don't know if it is, but there was a requirement for all towns, which I think is great. I think this is a terrific thing. When the permittees, which is about half, 2/3 of the communities in the state, they have to identify where the impervious areas are, but particularly which ones are connected to the streams and the ponds, which is a good part of them. And then every year they have to figure out whether there's been more or that some's been taken away. And using that information, and that's what I'm going to show you in a little bit, is to figure out the priorities for putting in best management practices. And then every community that has a permit is going to have to report on the amount of stormwater discharges that have been decreased, and also the pollutant loadings. And so what I'm going to show is what towns are going to start needing to do in about, I think, 3, maybe 4 years, but get ahead of the curve, you know. So this is what we've been doing for the past 4 years. In Leominster, we know that communities want to improve their waters, and what we've been doing is providing maps that show specifically where the pollutants are coming from and how much there's coming, and then that can be used, and we have been using it in Leominster, to identify the priorities for where do you put the best management practices so that you can get the best results from those. And along with that is, how do we get more pollutant reduction for less cost? The Monoosnoc Brook, it's about 3 miles long. It starts here at the city main water supply, No Town Reservoir. It comes down along Route 2. It goes into Pierce Pond, where I showed you where you had that big delta building up. From there, it goes down into increasingly more built up areas, and then it goes into Rockwell Pond, where I showed you the picture of all the loading that's going on in that, and then it comes through the densest part of Leominster, and it ends up going into the Nashua River. So that's 3 miles. The upper half of it is very little pollutants. The lower half makes up for it. We get a ton and ton of pollutants coming into the lower half of the brook. So what we've been doing is putting in best management practices. These aren't all for Monoosnoc Brook. This is a map that the city actually put together. It's draft yet, it hasn't been published, but there's over 250 best management practices. I'm going to call them BMPs for short. But there's over 250 BMPs in Leominster, not just for Monoosnoc Brook, but also for other streams and so forth. And I'd say we probably have about 80 or so for Monoosnoc Brook, but you can get an idea of the amount of best management practices that have been coming in, and I'll talk about where they come from in a bit. But the big thing is, where do you put them? Where's the best place? Well, the first thing you got to know is where are the pollutants coming into the brook? And that's what I'm showing on this slide. And what you can see here, see this dark orange line? That's the watershed for Lower Monoosnoc Brook. And then these red X's, you like the choice in color? That's where the discharges, those are where the discharges are actually taking place, because they're at the end of each one of the storm drain lines, and these sort of violet lines that you see are the storm drain lines in Leominster, and those little white boxes, those are the catch basins. So you can see that what's happening is it's all going into the catch basins, going directly into the brook. And so we know there may be a few other places, but very few, if any, where it's coming in. So we know exactly where they're coming in. So now we want to know how much. How much is coming in? So what we've done is we've taken each one of those catchment areas for the storm drain, and we've figured out the catchment area for it. So you can see here, this is for the William Street storm sewer. And you can see this is the area that it collects. Those are all little catch basins. All that stuff is coming down the William Street storm line and being dumped into the brook. It's one of those X's. And we've done that now for every single storm system in Leominster in Lower Monoosnoc Brook. Along with that, by going out in wet weather and by doing a little bit of field investigation, we also know the areas that aren't connected. And that's what I'm showing here in green. And there's a whole variety of ways, and it would take a bit of time to explain why those various places are not connected. But you can see about a third of the watershed is not connected to the brook. So those are, well, how would you rate those priorities? That'd be pretty low. So then we can focus on the other parts, and then we can be looking at the loading that's coming from those. And from all that, then we can begin to put in the stormwater practices for each one of those red X's. And that's where we've been putting in the best management practices. So that helps us to figure where do we need to put those in. So this is the small section that actually runs from Rockwell Pond through the center of Leominster. And again, the same, what I just mentioned, we figured out the pollutant loads for each one of the storm drains, and we've also figured out the places where it's not reaching to the brook for a whole set of different reasons. And it's a pretty simple process to figure this out. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, and it's not necessarily as accurate as you would need for engineering, for design, but it gives you a really good picture of what's going on in terms of stormwater. So now I'm going to take this one. This is the Cotton Street storm drain line that comes down and goes into the brook. And by doing that assessment, or the analysis of it, we know it's about 30 tons a year. And we also know that that's probably right, because down at Leominster Credit Union is where we took out the 250 tons of sediment that had built up. And then what we do is, on top of that, we can put in the soils, and we can overlay the soils. And from that, knowing what the values of the soils are, what their suitability is, we can figure out what kinds of BMPs would work best. And it's a fairly simple and straightforward process to do this. If I figured it out, anybody can. So what we've done now is we've put in bioretention areas. Actually, this was going to be a bioswale, but instead we put in a tree box filter, a storm tree, in this location. And then we put in a bioswale here, and we've put in a, what we like to call is a sediment vault. It's a big sediment tank. It's also called a water quality inlet. It has lots of names, but it removes a lot of material from the storm drain line. When we get done with the few remaining ones, we're going to cut that pollutant load in half. So the 30 tons, we'll be cutting down about 15 tons of that. And so if we do this as we go through the various storm drain areas, then we can begin seeing some improvements in terms of the brook. On the upper part of the brook, mostly rain gardens. We were building a lot of rain gardens. But what we find with the rain gardens is they're very effective, but you can't put them in every place. And also, they don't capture all that much pollutant because they're not that big. You can make bigger bioretention areas, but I'll just leave it at that, and Scott showed some of that. Collectively, all of these BMPs that you see here have reduced the loading that's going into Rockwell Pond. You see the Rockwell Pond there, has reduced that by 25 tons a year. And we still plan on putting in more best management practices to get more of those pollutants. And so what this is all doing, it's doing what they're doing in the Blackstone River here, creating parks, creating walkways. The city got grants from the Gateway Cities program to start building a set of Monoosnoc Brook walks. This is the first phase of it. So now people, as the brook improves, will be able to get to the brook because you weren't able to do that before. But these also include BMPs. So if you look on right here, what they put in is a bioretention area. The paving is porous paving. And so we're incorporating all that stormwater in as part of the overall improvements to the brook. So that's all I'm going to say about Monoosnoc Brook for right now. But I just wanted to say that the process that I just talked about, that we've used in detail, going down and really looking very closely, can be used anywhere. This is, I'm going to jump across the state to Pittsfield. And EPA has this wonderful set of maps that shows where the regulated areas are. But more than that, they also show where the disconnected impervious areas are. And there's different colors, which you can't really see here. But better than that, they have statistics on those land uses. And by using those land uses and using those statistics and just plugging them in to the simple spreadsheet, we can get a rough idea of how many tons of pollutants. How many people have used the maps that are on the EPA website? Very few. Go there. It's interesting. Take a look at them. They're great. And Ann may talk about it some more. So anyway, so what we find is there's about 365 tons of pollutants going into those two lakes a year. And times 10, you can do the math. Same thing for Lake Cochituate. The Lake Cochituate's already got a lot of problems with stormwater and weeds and so forth. And this is just one of the sub-watersheds in Natick. But from just this watershed alone, we're seeing somewhere around 390 tons of pollutants going into Lake Cochituate. So something needs to be done because that's mounting up really quickly. We did the same thing over in Fitchburg. This is the last one. I'm not going to keep on going on this line. But in Fitchburg, they're particularly important because Falula Brook is very much like Monoosnoc Brook, and it's the Fitchburg State University campus and neighborhood that's the big polluter, and they don't know it. I mean, they don't know that they're putting in this amount of pollutants into the brook. But if you go upstream, where the pollutants are coming in is roughly in this area. If you go upstream, you still have wild trout. The stream is still in pretty good quality. If you go down and start looking around here and snooping around, you see some interesting changes in terms of the brook, and a great amount of degradation going on. And as you go further down, as you add more pollutants in, the quality and the ecosystem diversity plummets in that. And where it all ends up is in the Nashua River. So one of the things we're looking to do is to try and deal with that problem as well. Once you have that information, you know where the pollutants are coming from, you know how much and so forth, then you can look at real closely at community planning and community development. And as Scott had said before, the money for fixing stormwater isn't going to come out of the general budget. The place where you can get the biggest bang for the buck is if you know where to have redevelopment and new development, municipal maintenance and so forth, and you make that all part of the community planning process, and that what will give the means so that we can start reducing those huge burdens of polluted runoff that comes into all of our streams and lakes. And just to give you a couple examples on this, this is Leominster. This is the past, I'd say, 3 or 4 years. This is maybe a fraction of the projects, because Leominster is forever and ever changing. It's always growing. And so we're able to tie into these different projects. They just finished up a bridge going over Monoosnoc Brook, and they've put in a set of stormwater practices, so they're going to be cutting that down. I'm thinking it's about 10 tons from this storm drain system. We missed this opportunity to do it as part of a residential redevelopment, but we're just finishing up a redevelopment of an industrial building, and we've put in a lot of those BMPs that I showed you before on the Cotton Street line through that project using MassWorks money. So that's additional money coming in, of which some of it can be used for stormwater. So that gives you an idea of all of the opportunities that come along, and they're constant. But they're only going to be available if somebody's looking for them. And in Leominster, the first thing that the Conservation Commission says and the Planning Board says to anybody who comes in with a project, what are you going to do about stormwater? And then they have maps to begin showing them what they can do about it. So these are the lessons that I've learned from Monoosnoc Brook, and it's been a great experience. One is the streets are the things we want to be looking at. The second thing is that we're not measuring, we're not looking at how much pollutants. There's lots of great BMPs, there's lots of, they can be used in all different places. I'll talk about that a little bit after the break. But we need to know where we should be focusing on. And then once you have those numbers, then you can be figuring out the priorities. And I think the other thing that goes along with it, which we don't have an answer yet, is that the costs of the BMPs range considerably, and I'll show you some more information. But we put in BMPs that's 1 cent a pound, and if you look on the internet and you look at Lake Tahoe, they've got a lot of money out there. Their BMPs are costing $100 a pound. So there's a big difference, there's a big range in terms of what you can get in terms of pollutant reduction. And then the other thing that I didn't go into a whole lot is when I look at Monoosnoc Brook and when I look at other towns, it's pretty straightforward that we can get about a 3% reduction, in impervious areas every year. So the main point here is that you really need to have this information so you can begin laying out a strategy for how you can do that and how you can do it at the least possible cost to the community or to your lake association. This holds true for lake associations as well. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about, and I stayed on time. Scott has it. No, it's called, there's lots of different models out there for calculating. It's an alphabet soup of the different And they get progressively more and more accurate. But the one that we've used, because we don't need to get into that level of accuracy, because we're just kind of sketching out, we use what's called the simple method. And that was one of the first approaches that they come up with. I think it was from the Center for Watershed Protection. And it's still widely used. Of course, as time goes on, they get more and more technical. But the simple method is just fine for figuring out community planning and beginning to figure out where do you want to put your priorities.
And what is that? Where do you find that? Where do you find this? What is the simple?
CWP.org.
Huh?
CWP.org.
CWP.org. Do they have it right there? Okay.
Look around.
Yeah, if you can't find it, send me an email and I'll send you some stuff. Yeah, or Google the simple method. It's in a lot of manuals. The New Hampshire DES has it in their manuals, and I know many other states have the simple method as well. But there's also a spreadsheet that makes it really easy. You know what I'm talking about. That makes it really easy. You just put the numbers in and the pollutant loads kick out.
And you just need land use? For
Yeah,
utility?
yeah. It requires you to, either from aerial photos or better yet, to go out and walk the catchment areas just to get a better sense of what's there. You can do it from aerial photos. And it's a rough measure. I don't try and get down to, square footage, but it gives you a rough idea of what is there and more or less what you're going to get for pollutants. It's great for estimating pollutant loads. If you were going to go out and put in best management practices, it's no good. You need detailed engineering design to do those kinds of things. And this does not give you that. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much.